Hello, and welcome to the Proactive Caregiving Podcast. As a CPA with over 20 years as an industry accountant, Jessica stepped away from the corporate world to become a full-time caregiver for her mother. Having learned invaluable lessons along the way, she is now here to share those with you and to invite you to join her on this caregiver's journey. Here is your host, Jessica Cannon.
Hello everybody, I am the Proactive Caregiver, and I specialize in educating others on how to be proactive by empowering you, the caregiver. If you cannot take care of yourself, then you cannot take care of your loved one. So today, I wanted to talk about caregiver cultural diversity. I know the one thing that is constant in our lives is change, which means we have to learn how to adapt over and over. For caregivers, change is difficult when we don't have a network of support, a solid network of support. But for life to be a little less scary and maybe even a little less lonely, we must become socially and culturally competent together. Before, I thought cultural diversity meant just identifying all groups and treating them as they're significant. But I also had to acknowledge that these differences in how things are run, how people see things, it created this desire for me to want to bond with like minds and make that more of a priority to fill my needs as a caregiver. I figured surely there's more people out there who are wanting similar things or needing similar services or even just wanting to connect like I did. So a couple weeks ago, I spoke about self-awareness in podcast number 53. But another part of awareness is recognizing how our culture influences how people think and how they react or act upon anything that's happening in our day-to-day lives. You know, the coronavirus and the pandemic that came after, it created a big cultural clash, and it brought light to this disconnection and struggles that caregivers have been facing all along. Nurses in all areas and assisted living communities, they experience levels of exhaustion far greater than they probably ever imagined possible. Domestic caregivers, for that reason, became even more isolated than we already felt like we were. Which is why I wanted to have today's guest on. Lucinda Koza is the founder and CEO of iAlly. It's a community-driven app that saves millennial family caregivers time, reduces stress, and enables informed decision-making, which is harder than it seems. And she does this through providing services that fulfill their unique needs and connecting them with the app. She jumped to action when she suddenly found herself becoming her father's sole caregiver in 2018. Lacking support from every direction, Lucinda fell through the cracks of our cultural system. Lucinda's life mission launched to advocate for the invisible family caregiver labor force. By tapping into her awesome background as an actor, she applied storytelling and digital strategy talents in hopes of making a difference. Using technology and other technological solutions, she was able to create this app for millennial family caregivers. She crafted a way to create community and utilize shared resources. Since founding iAlly, Ms. Koza has been named a hero for the COVID crisis by Authority Magazine and Thrive Global. She was acknowledged as a visionary voice by All Raise organization. Ms. Koza remains a devoted family caregiver to her father and also a Time's Up Care Economic Business Council member. Thank you for coming on with me today, Lucinda.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here. I was totally, when I saw that post that you made on Instagram, I think you said something about we're not going to see real change until we target the caregiver rather than the care receiver.
Yes.
That's when I was like, oh my God.
Exactly.
This is my girl. Like, I've never seen anyone else say it like that. Really? Never.
Well,
and that's my whole thing.
It's funny that you say it that way, because when I, as a caregiver, when I first started looking for information and resources, one of my biggest frustrations was finding people who cared about my needs just as much. You can find a lot of people out there and a lot of services that will teach you how to care for your loved one who's living with dementia, but it doesn't teach the caregiver how to care for herself or himself, to keep that energy going, keep the mood positive, and all of that kind of stuff. So that's what kind of got me going in this direction.
Yeah, and it's exactly what you said at the beginning of the podcast, which is, if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of your loved one. Exactly. And I mean, if you can't be a person, if you can't be a healthy person, then there's no hope for your loved one. So, and that's what, I don't think it's a sinister underlying societal thing. I think society is just glossing over us.
Right.
I think it's just easy to gloss. It's easy for them to gloss over us. Well, because society has always glossed over women, nurses. I don't know. It's just, we're just totally invisible somehow. And it's gotten to this point somehow, and it's a crisis.
It is. You're right. It is. And it's, we need help. We need to be acknowledged as needing help. And so this is where I thought it was really interesting that I wanted to kind of show people that this is how this kind of cultural shock takes place. So one of the things I was hoping you'd be able to tell us about was, let's take a step back and look at life. What was life like for you, let's say back in 2016, when you were actually still just pursuing a professional career and not having to worry or focus about caregiver needs at that point? Tell me about what your life was like as that actor that stepped forward to Cannes Film Festival.
Wow.
And what that culture may be like, that creative culture was like at that time.
Gosh, that's so, wow. No one has ever asked me that question. That is so interestingly put. You know, I mean, in so many ways, it was I lived in Manhattan in like a tiny, tiny tree house in the Upper West Side. And of course, I loved it. I loved, every second of it. Although I also recognize that I'm looking at it with, rose-colored glasses. I mean, there were, I was not really adulting, so to speak, in many ways. I mean, I did not, you know, I, I was doing what many millennials probably are doing when they suddenly get hit with responsibility. I didn't own property. I was, I was acting. I had cool jobs. I mean, I had a film at the Cannes Film Festival, which on paper is a huge, success.
Right.
But, in my bank account, it's not really.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. So that was kind of the life that I was living. It was like, incredibly enriching as a young person and as an artist, and meeting all kinds of people on a daily basis, and just like, I mean, God, it was wonderful. But also in so many ways I was not adulting or whatever. But I had, met my future husband, and that was a huge step into, reality, I guess.
Right.
But I lived far away from my parents. They were both, well, my dad was remarried. They're divorced, which is also true for so many millennials.
Exactly.
And my family was totally, dispersed, which is also true for so many millennials. Like, we did not have the kind of family culture that stuck together. I mean, turns out I wish more than anything that I had that. Because it is nothing but helpful in your life, man, to have family that cares about you and gives a shit about you and what happens to you, and if you're sick or well, or if you need help, they will show up. I mean,
exactly.
I was not thinking about the future. I thought I was just, but of course I'm so grateful for that time.
I think we all need time like that. And I think it's normal, because even as you're saying it, I'm looking back at the times that you don't really think about the future at that point in time. You just live life as the best you know how. And a lot of it is, I'm looking for adventure. I'm looking for fun. I'm looking for things that grow a career, and just this other side, this more serious and more, I don't want to say depressing, because it is a harder area to deal with when you go from having fun and living life to suddenly finding yourself in a situation like you did, rolling forward into 2018, when now, your family is separated and spread apart, and it's a horrible reality check.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's when I felt, and another reason why, maybe why I'm glad I had that time, is now I guess I appreciate what I do have.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I appreciate that I have a house with my husband, because I realize like just how incredibly, outrageously difficult it is to achieve something like that for anyone.
Exactly. Exactly. And so
Yeah.
when we come from all different walks of life and or have all these different struggles getting to certain stages in life, and then eventually once you feel, it's almost like once you finally feel secure in life, life happens, and it sometimes it rips that rug right out from underneath your feet, and other times it beats you down and it pushes you, it forces you in a different direction, one that you weren't planning on going. Because that's what I think is amazing with your story, is that
Yes, that's so true.
you took a moment in life that knocked you down and turned it into something that connected all of us and is becoming a huge resource for people. So the listeners can kind of understand. I'll let you explain about what your cultural shock was when you became your dad's sole caregiver. Can you tell us a little bit about how that happened and what came out of that?
Yeah. So I basically, so he was remarried at the time. He's since divorced again, twice divorced. And I just happened to see him, and I could tell something was terribly wrong. I decided to take him to the ER. He had had several strokes, and no one else showed up to the hospital.
Mm.
And out of like every human being in the world, out of his wife at the time, my mother, even though they are divorced, my mother and my two siblings didn't show up. I mean, suddenly I just had this enormous responsibility, and he had nowhere to live because his wife had kicked him out. It was just horrible timing. And I just, the way you put it, I mean, shock. It was just complete, like, oh my God, I haven't been paying attention to my family, or like, it never occurred to me that my parents are divorced, remarried, my siblings, were so dispersed, and data shows that our generation, that's really true of so many of us. And there just was no support system. And no planning had been done, by anyone, including my dad.
Of course, no one expects for this kind of stuff to happen, but when it does, it's hard.
Right. And all of a sudden, I had to figure everything out.
So as you're starting to figure this out, what kind of started to sink into your mind? What felt like it was the heaviest thing that you needed right away?
I needed someone to, like, just force themselves into being there for
Mm-hmm.
me, because there there was like one person really who was sort of dipping their toe into
Mm-hmm.
to helping. Like they would come to the hospital and then hang around and then leave, and like that just, it wasn't enough. But I wasn't going to ask, like I, I was so traumatized. Like I needed
Mm-hmm.
someone to come in and just do something.
At least sit with you at the very least, because I can only imagine that going from a moment that you never expected to ever happen to suddenly be in a hospital surrounded by equipment that I know when I found myself in this situation, I didn't know what the beeping monitors meant, and is this good or bad, or where do we go from here, and can they leave soon, or can someone explain to me what does it mean when something on the monitor goes from a normal color and suddenly it's blinking red? I mean, is
Oh my God.
it's just that kind of a shock as everything starts to settle in, and then nurses come in and they're doing their jobs for the patient,
Yeah.
but at the
Yeah.
same time you're sitting there and you're going, what do I do? How can I help? Where do I fit in? Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God.
Yes.
And it's a panic
Yes.
attack where at the same time, I I know a couple of, I've had these situations with mom, but when they first started happening, it was like, how do I sit here and learn as much as possible in this short moment and still give her the face of, it's okay, you're going to be okay. But I'm panicking on the inside, like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Where do I go? And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah. That's it. That's it. Like I was so young, like physically and mentally, and like spiritually. Like I was so young and I was alone, lost, devastated. I was in that hospital for 5 days.
Mm-hmm.
I slept on this couch, like a plastic couch, I didn't leave to take a shower or eat. I know that I'm not the nurse's job, but
Right,
like what, like how could they not look at me and be like, honey,
right.
is there someone that you can call? Like, is there something I can do for you? Like that was what I needed. Like, I needed someone to tell me that it was not okay,
Mm-hmm.
because I felt crazy,
Mm.
because I was like, this is not okay. Right.
Right,
Right. Like in my head, I
right.
was like, this is not okay. Right. Right. Like, this is not okay that I'm here by myself and I'm doing this. This is not okay. Right. Is it? No one else is saying that it's not okay. So maybe I'm just a failure. Maybe I'm
Mm.
really weak, and like, what's wrong with me that I'm freaking out so much? Like, come on. I mean, I needed someone to just confirm with me, this is not okay.
Mm.
Someone else should be here with you at
Right.
least.
And that's the hard part, because now they're torn as well. I'm sure they had to have seen that you were distraught, but their focus has to be on the patient. And unfortunately, this is why caregivers go through so much stress and anxiety and fear because we keep finding ourselves in these situations that we're never prepared for. I know.
Yeah.
And then they try to bridge the gap. And depending on, again, the cultural system, depending on what insurance you have, so what services are available to you, or even the severity of why your loved one is there. Because I know when my dad was in the hospital and he was basically dying from pneumonia, we were still trying to be hopeful and positive. And so we had a social worker come in at some point to help us transition, or the conversation get it started, of transitioning him from when he is better or healthy enough to move him to a rehabilitation center. This is what you can expect. But we were also in a veterans hospital, and that may be what is culturally expected there, not everywhere. We had the understanding that the responsibility of and I honestly believe the only reason they came in at this point was because there was an issue of transportation. He's going to have to be transported from the hospital to a rehabilitation center, and who does that fall on? But otherwise, other times that I've been in the hospital for mom, whether it was an inpatient or an emergency, it's kind of the same thing. Nurses and doctors focus on the patient, and even as they're going over the details with the patient, it's like you get hooked up to a water hose and suddenly you're hearing terms and explanations that make no sense, and trying to understand what it means in the moment, and then also trying to think through past that moment. What does this mean when we get home? Will we go home?
Yep. Yes. That was the only time a social worker came and spoke with me, was when she was, I'm sure, told, you need to get that guy, out of there and into rehab, because his insurance is ready to move him on. It was like all of the sudden, it was just so cold. And it was the first I had heard of what was supposed to happen next.
One of the things that I've also learned since going through this process is another breakdown, another gap of this cultural system is, even if someone could approach you, if they do, they have to be very careful of what they say and the information they give you. Because in our cultural society, on the other side of this, the doctors, the nurses, the hospitals, their needs are to protect themselves and mitigate against legal risks, which leaves us both in the situation of, so where does that get me? Where does that take us? And how do we figure out what to do from this point on?
Exactly. It's like everything someone said to me, and this really just like blew me wide open. In a hospital, everything comes down to a code, like a billing code.
Exactly.
And there's no billing code for, comforting the caregiver.
Exactly. I think anything that is done out of the person's own human nature to bring. Sometimes they can bring an extra Jello or an extra drink or an extra, we have these extra things in the nurses unit, and I thought you could use this drink, or here's a blanket. But you're absolutely right. We're not a billing code. So
Yeah.
that's not something that would help caregivers in this situation, especially for caregivers who find themselves going back for repeated services to whether it's inpatient or outpatient. It's you're dumped
Yeah.
back into the same system that is scary enough to be in, and
Yeah.
having to find your way through it and figure out, which is where I got frustrated many times. I wanted to be prepared while I was there instead of stepping out and
Right.
walking out later and then within a couple of weeks getting statements in the mail. And
Yeah.
again, another culture shock for all the expenses of what took place to save or help our loved ones.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just don't think that's going to be fixed. I don't think we're going to be a code.
No, we're not on their radar because we're not the ones that are going to create and turn profits for them. So it forces us to kind of take care of ourselves as caregivers, which is the awesome, incredible thing that came out of your story is your response to this and creating iAlly.
Yeah, well, thank you. I just hope that, and I think this is good. I think it's good that I feel this way. That every day I'm just never satisfied, and I'm always just every day I'm worried that I'm losing someone, or that I'm not, that someone is trying to reach out, or trying to reach out as in like just they sign up.
Oh, right.
And like that's because that takes a lot.
It does
for people. Yeah, it can take a lot. It's very brave to sign up, in this kind of situation. I'm just so worried. I get worried that someone signs up and then they think that no one cares, or oh, this isn't really going to help me, or this isn't for me, or something. That's what I'm afraid of every day.
It's funny that you say that, because I used to think the same thing about doing this podcast. And
really?
Yes. And one of the things I finally realized and accept is the ones who need you will find you. The ones who need you will find you. And because their needs are so great, and that whether it's information, a connection, or asking a question to help you point them in the right direction.
Right.
That's where I have the trust that the universe guides us in directions towards probably answering, whether it was prayed out loud or unanswered prayers, that he knows what's on our heart. And so they will find you as they need you. And because you have created something that's helped fulfill their needs in a way that our cultural system does not, I don't think you have anything to worry about. I think by going through all of this, the word of mouth is going to spread, because as illnesses and issues like the deterioration, and I'm sure now that your father has experienced stroke, he may be experiencing dementia-related illnesses as well. And
yes,
areas like that are just happening more and more. And so caregivers are growing faster than resources can keep up with their needs.
Yes. Yes. And when I think about, thank you for saying that. first of all.
Absolutely.
I just think about like just how alone I felt and how hard it can be when the person that you're caring for is not acting like themselves, like with, like you said, like dementia related, especially in the end stages. It doesn't feel like your loved one anymore. So that's when it is so hard, because you don't have any of that like familiarity or joy, or so you're almost like, it just feels terrible. And sad, and oh my God, and we just have to help each other.
Yes,
we just have to help each other survive it. Sometimes the really hard parts, we just have to help each other, or I mean, because what else do we have?
Exactly.
Some of us.
Yeah, sometimes in many cases. And the sad thing is, in many cases, your story is not uncommon. There are others that are trying to care for their loved ones, whether it's a parent or spouse or even a child, and they are lost in a system. They're lost in a system and they don't have a strong support network. And who do we turn to? How do we connect and find someone that would be willing and able to help? And that's where I think more and more caregivers, I even hear them say, there should be an app that does whatever, XYZ. It's fill in their blank of whatever need they have at that time. We should have an app that does this. We should have an app that does that. And it's not by any means an easy way out, but it is a better way of connecting, so that if more caregivers find themselves in the situations like you have experienced and I have experienced, when they find themselves there, then maybe the healthcare system, that word of mouth travels, and maybe they can at least suggest, hey, I see that you're going through this bad time. Have you heard about this? Have you heard about iAlly? You should connect here. You should look out to this. And that's advice. We may not be a billing code, but giving advice is free.
Yes.
And helping others is priceless.
If there can be a pamphlet in a room, in a waiting room, in a lobby,
right,
like that could save someone. I mean, it would have given me like all the hope in the world. Like,
exactly.
If I had seen something that was like support for millennials, I would have been like, oh my God, there are other like young people that are dealing with this too on their own. Like, holy shit.
Exactly.
I mean, I thought I was the only one. I was like, what's wrong with me?
You certainly feel like that when you're in the moment. And it's odd after the fact. I knew I wasn't, but at the same time, in that moment, you feel like no one knows what you're going through. No one understands what you're going through. They can't possibly understand the pain and frustration that I'm feeling right now. But when you reach out and find someone that can actually speak to what you're going through, all of a sudden your world just got a little brighter, because someone took the time to shine their light on you.
Yeah, that feels really good when that happens.
It does. And it is something that helps me keep going forward, no matter how I feel about doing the podcast or the blogs or trying to get information out there that would help people, it makes me feel better when I hear at least one person come back saying, thank you for sharing that. It made a difference. And this difference that you're making is amazing. And I know that you were able to launch the online service on the ially.com, and that's i-ally.com. But
yes,
the app in itself, now, has that one launched or is it about to launch?
it's just about to launch.
Awesome.
It's literally testing right now.
Perfect.
So very close.
So help is on the way, basically.
Yes.
So all the other millennial caregivers out there that feel like they are alone will not be, because they will literally be one tap away from someone who can give them advice or even point them in a different direction, or share a story that says, I know what you're going through. I feel it. I know exactly what you're dealing with.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yes, absolutely.
So that's why I love that I saw a quote that you had, one of the articles that you were in, and you basically point out that the only way we can see a systemic societal change in our lifetime is through organized community allyship. Someone to reach out their hand and bring someone to the table, to give an opportunity to an unlikely candidate, to provide a platform for people to tell their stories, which is beautiful. Because we learn
it really
from each
is
other.
like, it doesn't sound like me because it's such a good quote. Oh my God. Wow.
Well, that is the perfect example, the difference of when you have the time to actually think it through, where your thought goes, versus being in the moment and trying to calm a storm of panic within.
Oh, so true.
I see it in you, and I can hear the voice of a caregiver who has gone through an incredible amount of pressure and pain points, and trying to find your way through that dark time of life, that dark season of life, is difficult. But it's not as difficult when you have someone there with you and you can build that support network. Because one of the things you mentioned earlier was not having his wife or ex-wife or your brother or anyone come to your side to help. And unfortunately, that's another thing that happens in our culture, is that some generations understand, not so much that how their family was raised before, but there's this generational passed down of information, this tradition of, you will take care of your loved ones, you will take care of your family regardless.
Right. Right.
And then there's the other side of that, where there's more people out there that their family is so disconnected, and they've gone through so many things that were just too much to keep the family together, for example, and they're scattered. And so I feel like now, as a caregiver, I'm recreating my family. I'm recreating a network of caregiver family, because it is hard for family members to stick together. Even with my own siblings, it's hard having communication sometimes and being in the same room without having an argument. And sometimes it's even harder to get them into the room to have a conversation. This disconnect and this cultural gap of how we help each other, it's going to take people like you, Lucinda, to help us shorten and reduce the gaps.
Well, thank you. And you too. We need community again. We used to have community, especially around things like birth and death.
Mm-hmm.
And then somehow we all became very isolated, even from our own family.
Right. Well, life happens and we react in different ways culturally. And I guess, especially with the pandemic, we were all kind of forced to socially distance. And coming out of that, it's been hard to find that, go back to not that we should go back to it exactly the way it was, but getting back to that community network again, it's kind of hard. There's this convenience of staying away from people and not being able to connect, but at the same time, we need each other. We need to help each other. We need to share the education, improve our communication with each other, and teach compassion, because it's actually harder than we think. Compassion is a learned skill. It's not something everyone's born with knowing how to react to each other.
Right. And especially doing things like how to help, how to really help, like not just thoughts and prayers, but how to show up. I mean, I know it's the pandemic, but how to show up metaphorically, that in a way that actually makes a difference.
Exactly. Well, I am looking forward to the app launching, and I can't wait till it's out there. And I want people to know that iAlly, the app, it's on its way. And so we'll eventually have a resource that we can connect each other and be able to share resources, or not feel so distant, whether you're in a different state or maybe even a different country, but sharing information on how to handle situations.
Yes.
It's coming.
Excited.
Thank you so much for coming on with me today, Lucinda. I think you are absolutely right in responding the way you did, and where most people would have just gone home because they feel like they have nothing to add. And I'm so grateful that you didn't, that you went forward with iAlly.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I look forward to talking with you more. And
definitely. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining in and listening with us today. I hope this gave you a little bit more food for thought. And until next time, be proactive. Take care, everybody.
Thank you for joining us today. We really hope you've enjoyed this episode. To learn more about proactive caregiving and to hear other episodes of this podcast, please visit www.jessicalazelcannon.com. This podcast is produced by Cannon Light Media, LLC, www.cannonlightmedia.com. Music provided by Chris Paradise.